ask that you turn off or silence all cell phones. Meetings are televised every day on Channel 2 at 6 p.m. and at midnight. On today's study session, we have 2 items on the agenda, and the first item on the agenda is debt presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioner. I'll turn this over in just a second. We're excited about this debt presentation tonight. I was just talking to Roberta, and I believe we talked about this. She said on her second day of work here. So it's been a long time coming. Just a couple quick notes before I turn it over. There is a lot here. I'll let the presentation speak for itself for the most part, but a few notes. We'll answer what we can tonight and collect any other questions and get them back to you if you have specific questions. No decisions need to be made tonight. The decision to bond money or not can be made relatively quickly, so we have time. Although everything we are talking about deals with funding, it's not really a discussion about the 2024 budget, but to be sure, it's about a long-term approach to borrowing money that does have budget implications, so it's adjacent to the budget. Because the topic is so dense, it's probably a good idea to ask questions as you have them, so feel free to break into the presentation. We want this to be conversational rather than waiting till the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our finance director to go through the presentation.
Hello.
Hi, Herbert.
How are you?
Good.
Well, I really appreciate y'all giving me the time today to talk about my favorite subject, and I'm sure yours, which is debt. We have broken this presentation into 6 components. There'll be a brief debt overview, a brief discussion about the city's debt policy, our current use of general obligation bonds, a discussion about the cost of debt, and a discussion about an alternative to GO bonds, which is kind of why we're here today, and then our conclusion and time for discussion. So first, why do cities borrow money, issue debt? There's a slash there because I use those words interchangeably, and I don't want you to get confused. I will say borrow money, issue debt. It's exactly the same thing. I use those phrases interchangeably. But the city borrows money to solve a cash flow constraint. So if we have a major project or a major piece of equipment we want to borrow, we don't have enough money in this year's revenue to buy that thing, and we don't want to raise taxes dramatically this year to pay for it, we really have 3 choices. One is we can deplete our reserves. 2, we can delay the project or purchase. You can kind of think about this as a household saving money to pay for a house cash while they're also paying rent, so it's really not very feasible. Also, if you save today's money for a project that's going to be 10 years from now, then you're really taxing today's citizens and today's business for a resource they may never use. And the third option is to issue multi-year debt to fund the project. So first, whenever we issue multi-year debt, we always know what the funding source is going to be to pay that debt off in the future years. And in the case of the city, it's our future property tax levies and future sales tax collections always pays down our debt. Most commonly, we use 10-year bonds, sometimes a 20-year GO bond. And in this case, let's say we're building the fire station. We will build it in year 1, take out a 10 or 20-year GO bond, and we'll collect money in the form of property tax levies or sales tax for the next 20 years, and the citizens and the businesses that get the benefit of that fire station are actually paying for the fire station in the form of taxes collected in the year that the bond is serviced and the year the fire station's in service. One thing I do want to stress is that when we do fund a construction project or buy a piece of equipment using debt, that the debt really isn't the funding source for purchasing the asset. I know it looks like that, and in fact we've used that phraseology before in the budget process. Oh, we're going to fund this project with debt. No, we're going to borrow money, and the funding source is the future revenue that retires the debt. So I want to make sure we keep that in mind. So a brief conversation about our debt policy. The debt policy has 2 components. It has statutory component, and it has internal goals that we've established. I used some numbers on this slide. The numbers are derived from Moody's last credit opinion when we issued our last GEO bond. I just picked that as kind of a line in the sand. That's where those numbers came from. Felt official. The first statutory rule is that our total outstanding debt has to be 30%, less than 30% of our assessed valuations. In 2022, our assessed valuations were $272 million. 30% of that is $82 million. Our current outstanding debt is $22,485,000. So we're well within the requirements of that statute. I want to point out that a lot of our debt is actually exempt from the statute. It's exempt if it's used to build roads or whatever. I used all the debt just to show that we're within this policy or within that statute. The next statute is a city charter ordinance, number 56, which says our current year borrowing needs to be less than 28% of the prior year's tax levy. Our prior year's tax levy was 8.2 million times 28%, that's 2.3 million. We generally issue GEO bonds for the pavement management program, which is about $2 million a year. So our first internal goal is that our debt per capita is less than $1,000. Ours comes in at $623. Our second internal goal is that our debt per capita as a percentage of per capita income is less than 5%. Ours is 1.4%. And the final internal goal is our mill rate to service debt is less than 10 mils. So our 2022 mills, our debt service millage was 6.9 out of a total of 30.135 mils levied. So we meet that requirement. So the good news is that our current debt position and our current borrowing practices are well within our debt policies. We don't really have any problems there. Everybody looks like they're overjoyed by this topic. All right, so why does the city issue bonds? We have a practice, and this is really the annual use of GEO bonds. We have a practice of issuing GEO bonds every year to fund our pavement management program. If you go back 20 years or more, you'll see that the city has issued GEO bonds on an annual basis. And from time to time, those bonds have been refinanced to obtain lower interest rates. Since 2016 specifically, our bonds that we have issued to fund the pavement management program have been about $1.4 million a year, is about where it's averaged. So since we're talking mostly about the pavement management program, I did want to talk about that just for a second. It has 4 components. The first 2 are surface preservation and rehabilitation. This is our crack and surface sealing and our mill and overlay. And these are roads that are in fair to good condition, and we're just keeping them in good condition. The third component is the total reconstruction of a road. This is when you tear the road up and put a new road in. And the fourth is stopgap measures. So this is a failed road that we haven't torn up and replaced yet, so we have to patch it. The pavement management program really is those first 2 components. It's our surface preservation and our mill and overlay program. That's what we're budgeting for in the CIP every year, and that's what we're borrowing money for every year. The stopgap measures are funded by the street department budget. So that hot box that we bought that you approved a few weeks ago, the street department bought that, and they're using that for these stopgap measures. And finally, the reconstruction projects are special projects that usually take more than a year to plan, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. Those are things like the Thornton Street project and the 4th Street project between Seneca and Choctaw. So you really can't have a debt conversation without talking about debt. So let's have a little bit of fun and look at a chart with lots of numbers on it.
I have a question a second.
Yes.
So the reconstruction, total reconstruction is not in either of those other 2 categories.
Correct.
So, and I can't read it very well here. But how is that financed then?
Well, that since it's a
Capital.
one-off project, that gets discussed when the project is being discussed.
Okay.
So, like the 4th Street project, we'll talk about it again a little bit later, but when we did in the budget process last year, We identified that the state of Kansas was going to pay $1 million. We
Right.
had a couple million in reserves and FFE money that we saved, and that's how we were gonna fund it. Now that it's over budget, we've got another 1.5 million that we have to decide how we're going to fund it.
Okay, and then, so that's not out of our GO bonds.
Well, right, it could be a GO bond, but it's not the annual program.
Got it, okay,
right?
okay.
So this first column, remember I said that we always identify how we're paying off a loan. So this chart or this table shows all of our outstanding governmental fund bonds and temp notes. The ones I just highlighted in orange are serviced by future sales tax collections. The ones that I just highlighted in green are going to be paid off with future property tax collections. Our total outstanding bonds as of today, governmental bonds, are almost $24 million. And about half of those are being serviced with property tax collection, and about half of those are being paid for with sales tax collections. And the final thing that I want to point out on this slide is the GO bond the thing I'm pointing to, that's the temp note. Right now we have a $1.35 million temp note that in the 2023 budget is scheduled to be refunded with a GO bond. We would borrow the money and then pay that off and then service that debt over 10 years. In addition to this $24 million in governmental fund debt, we also have debt in two of our enterprise funds, the sewer fund and the stormwater capital fund. You can see those are being serviced with the sewer fee revenues and stormwater impact fees. And we've about $3 million outstanding in the sewer fund and $2 million in the stormwater capital fund. So we have total debt outstanding today of $29 million. So what is the cost of borrowing $2 million? So I know we've talked about the number 1.4 million is the average that we've been borrowing on the pavement management program. If you go back and you look at the 2022 budget, there's the 2022 to the 2026 CIP, right? And it shows the pavement management program and it shows it's being funded. It shows that starting in 2023, we're going to fund all $2 million every year with GO bonds, because before we were using some of that money for other things. This presentation is about going the opposite way, instead of borrowing more money, not borrowing any money, but I'm going to use the $2 million because if we just stuck with the plan as it is today, we'd be start borrowing $2 million a year for the pavement management program. So how much does it cost to borrow $2 million? First of all, we normally issue a temp note in the year of the project, and then we refund the temp note the next year. Temp notes have a 1.5 or thereabouts issuance cost, that's 30 grand. Then we keep the temp note for a year, we have to pay the interest, there's 66,000. We're assuming 3.3% interest rate on the entire conversation today, because that's what Greg, our bond person, said that's about what we could borrow money for, that's his best guess. Bond issuance cost is around 2%, so we'd have a bond issuance fee costs of $40,000, and then the interest expense over 10 years is $396,000. So the total cost of borrowing $2 million is $532,000. It's a 10-year bond. So the cost of the debt is 27% of the amount borrowed. There's a flip side. You didn't see my graphics because you were looking at me. I gotta go back. There's a flip side.
Oh, okay. It's the little things.
It's, you can do things to make you happy when you're the finance director. So when the city has reserves in excess of a short-term needs, we do invest those in short-term investments. The interest rate on the short-term investments varies from day to day. Right now, we are investing we've invested CDs, treasury bills, and treasury notes, and we're getting between 2.4 and almost 5%. But as early as just a year ago, year and a half ago, our interest rates for those short-term investments were 0.02.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
So I keep using the word debt service, and so I want to take a minute to define debt service. Debt service is that annual cost. So the annual debt service is the amount of money that must be expended every year to make the principal and interest payments. An amortization illustrates this. This is the same example of borrowing $2 million for 10 years, okay? First column is our principal payment. Second column is our interest payment. The third column is the annual debt service. So in year one, that $299,000 is the first year of debt service on this $2 million bond. The final column just shows you how much is left due at the end of the year. And you'll notice in year one, there's no debt service. That's because in year zero, we built the road, we took out the temp note. In year one, we are issuing the bond, paying off the temp note, not making any debt service payments. The first debt service payment happens in year two. We're making the first principal payment and the first interest payment. Every year, the debt service goes down a little bit because the outstanding principal goes down until the last year when the note's paid off and we no longer owe any money. So the city's annual debt service, which is really what I care about, the nut, right, is all of our debt service for all of our outstanding debt. So I'm going to start talking about annual debt service. So you saw that list with the 15 loans on it. The interest and principal on all of those loans is our annual debt service. And this is just a reminder that we always identify our revenue source that's going to pay the debt before we take out the debt. It's always either property tax revenues or sales tax revenues. All right, I know that's a big chart with lots of numbers on it. I just want you to get comfortable with the shape more than anything. Anything with a gray background on this is our debt service schedule if we continue to fund the pavement management program with $1.4 million in debt every year, okay? So if it's a gray background, it's existing debt, it's on the books as part of that $24 million. If it's a green background, we haven't borrowed that money yet, but it's scheduled to be borrowed if we continue to fund the pavement management program with the debt. And the yellow background is new debt that we would pay off with future sales tax revenues. Across the top, I just highlighted in red, is the year. And I just circled three numbers in the 2024 row. So the first number in the 2024 row, that means that this is our 2024 pavement management program. We took out a temp note, we paid the $21,000 temp note fee, that 1.5%. In the second year, the $74,000 represents paying the bond fee, issuance fee, and the interest on that temp note. And then the third year is the year that we have our first bond payment and make our interest payments at $209,000. The far right column is the total debt service that's paying off all the principal and all the interest and all the fees on those notes and bonds. So the $1.7 million represents the total repayment of the $1.4 million bond plus the financing costs. And then the bottom row that I just highlighted in red, that is the annual debt service. That's our nut. So in year one, it's $3.6 million. In year two, it's almost $3.8 million, etc. But I really want to draw your attention to the 12 rows I'm circling in red. That is what a full boat, so to speak, of borrowing $1.4 million a year every year looks like. So in any year where we do that, we have a total of $1,772,000 in debt service, right? We borrowed 1.4 that same year. We borrowed 1.4 to pay for the roads, but we're paying back 1.7, right? Mm-hmm. So for every $1.4 million we're borrowing, we're spending $372,000 in debt service, which leaves us about $1 million really net for our road project. It's 26.6% of the money that we just borrowed is servicing debt. So I just want to give you a brief reminder of the debt that was included on that slide. All of these projects were identified in the 2023-2027 capital improvements program during the 2023 budget process. All right? Some or all of these may be financed with debt. This decision hasn't been made yet, though we would project normally we would. We've got the 2022 pavement management temp note that will be refunded with a GO bond in 2023 this year. We have the 2023 to 2027 pavement management program, where we're assuming we're borrowing $1.4 million in temp notes in year 0, and then the next year we're refunding those with GO bonds. We've got the 4th Street between Seneca and Choctaw. This is what you were talking about. So we've already identified $1 million coming from the state of Kansas. We've identified $2.7 million that we have in the Street Capital Project Fund already. That's FFE dollars that we've saved plus reserves. And then we have this $1.5 million is to be determined, and it could be funded either through debt or reserves. Also included on that previous debt schedule was Fire Station number 3 with an estimated cost of $4 million. And 2 fire apparatuses need to be replaced. If we combine those together and bought them at the same time and used the same bond, it'd be about $2 million bond to purchase those fire apparatuses. All right? Having fun? Yeah? Okay. Jumping jacks, anybody? Okay. So, well, the next slide is really exciting because it's a picture. So this slide represents our debt service. This does not represent outstanding debt. It's the annual debt service. So 2023 annual debt service all the way to 2037. If it's brown, we're servicing the debt with sales tax. And if it's green, we're servicing the tax, they're servicing the debt with property tax. The line that I just laid over this is the mill levies. This is how many mills it would require to service the green piece, okay? That mill assumes a 3% annual increase in assessed values. And the reason the green bar in 2023 is smaller, it's only 6.9, is because in the 2023 budget, we allocated about $400,000 from countywide sales tax to pay some of the property tax debt to bring the mill down to 6.9. So in addition to the hard costs of borrowing debt and that annual debt service that slide represented, there are what I call soft costs to issuing debt. When we borrow money, we are limiting our ability to issue debt in the future. So the more money we have borrowed today, the harder it is to borrow more money. Borrowing money strains our future operating budget, so that $3 million, $4 million nut, when we do the 2024 budget, the first thing I'm going to do is take $4 million out, say that's got to service debt, and this is how much money we have left for everything else. It's just like your household budget. Let's say you make $3,000 a month and you have a $1,200 mortgage payment. The first $1,200 goes to your mortgage, and the rest of the money you can buy groceries or whatever. And borrowing money reduces our financial flexibility by obligating those future resources. So we talked a lot about debt and our current practices. And what Paul and I are presenting to you today is what we believe is a viable, a good alternative approach. What staff is proposing today is that we change from the current practice of funding the pavement management program with GO bonds to funding the program with current year revenues, and we're calling that pay-as-you-go. We're talking about it specifically because this is an annual maintenance program, right? It was those 2 in green. We do it every year to keep good roads good. Just like your household, If you're buying a new house, you're gonna borrow money, but for those monthly expenses, the groceries, the repairing your car, you don't take out a 10-year note to buy groceries.
Makes sense.
We know we have sufficient cash flow to pay for this annual expenditure because we have the cash flow plus $375,000 that we're using to service the debt, right? So we know the annual cash flow is there, but the hard part's breaking the cycle, because breaking the cycle requires an additional expenditure in those first years. We not only have to come up with $1.4 million from revenues that we're currently borrowing, but we have to keep servicing the debt, right? Until it's paid off.
So that's not just a few first years,
Right, you're gonna see,
that's a whole lot of years.
it's a few years. A few years, come on, in compared to your life, it's a very short period of time.
Man.
You don't
To
like
me-
my joke?
To me, a few years is
Printing
3.
takes time.
Okay,
It
several.
ain't gonna be 3.
Okay, several years. I'm gonna change it will take several years. That's 4 more, right? Several?
Okay.
Okay. So, this is I'm not trying to snow anybody, all the numbers are gonna be here.
Yeah.
So, this is what that debt service schedule looked like. I just want you to remember what that looked like. This is what the debt service schedule will look like if we no longer fund the pavement management program with debt. I know these numbers are small and there's a lot here, and we'll talk about these more on the next slide, but I just highlighted the debt service, annual debt service for pay-as-you-go. The blue is the annual debt service when we were funding the pavement management program with $1.4 million a year in debt. The purple is the increase or decrease in debt service. Plus, we have the $1.4 million that we have to pay for the pavement management program because we're no longer bonding that. And this bottom row is the difference in cash flow either required or supplied by the change, right? So this first number, $2.6 million, almost $2.7 million, is how much more cash that will be required in 2023 if we go to pay-as-you-go in 2023. It goes up that much because because debt service is going up $1.3 million because we are paying off that temp note from reserves from the countywide sales tax fund, and we also have to fund the $1.4 million pavement management program that we normally borrow with debt. In year 2, debt service has gone down. Debt service is now $286,000 lower than it would have been if we borrowed money in 2023 because we're not servicing that 2022 pavement management program bond, right? We still need the $1.4 million for pay-as-you-go, so we do need to come up with $1.14 million in cash. We are now to the end of a few years. And at the end of a few years, in 2025, the additional money needed, cash needed, is $950,000. And that trend continues going downward for the next several years until we get to year 8. In year 8, the script gets flipped. Right? In year 8, cash flows actually improved because we switched to going pay-as-you-go with the pavement management program. And you'll notice if you look straight up from there that we only are paying for 2 of the pavement management notes now, right? We only have debt service left on 2 of those bonds.
Makes sense.
The final pavement management loan is paid off, and bond is paid off in 2032. So you see in 2033, all of a sudden, our cash flow is $300,000 better than it would be if we borrowed $1.4 million for the pavement management program. That trend continues for the next several years, and you can see from 2034 onwards, our cash flows improved by $300,000 a year. So why are we talking about this today? And the reason we're talking about this today is today the city has the reserves to break the cycle. Why? All of a sudden, do we have reserves to break the cycle? It's really two major places that this money has come from. The first is the countywide sales and use tax have exceeded budget by about 1.5 and 1.7 million in 2021 and 2022 respectively. So I'm suggesting, since countywide sales tax has really been set aside for CIP, that we use it for this purpose of getting us out of this cycle. Also, over the last 10 years, the city's been really conservative. It's pulled back, it's spent on spending, especially during the COVID pandemic. Projects have gotten delayed. So really in reserves in the countywide and citywide sales tax fund, we have enough reserves to fund the first couple of years, first 3 years of this program.
The pay-as-you-go.
The pay-as-you-go, right? That extra 2.6, the extra million, the extra 950. After that, if you looked at a graph, and I guess that would have been a good slide, but if you looked at a graph of the countywide sales and use tax, you would see that those two tax sources are growing fairly rapidly. So it's that growth in the countywide sales tax and use tax that would fund the remainder of this program. And sort of to add a little sweetness to the cake here, to the poison. The countywide sales tax is scheduled to sunset in 2035. If we used our reserves to kickstart this program this year, our last pavement management program bond payment would occur in 2032, before that countywide sales tax actually sunsets.
That's a good point.
So by breaking this cycle, the city will become less reliant on property tax, mill levy to service debt, as illustrated on this next slide. If you'll remember, the last time you saw a slide with these beautiful colors, the green bars didn't really get smaller very fast. They stayed large, and they stayed large because we're borrowing that $1.4 million a year. This slide assumes we're not borrowing that money for the pavement management program anymore. Obviously, this goes to 2036, 2037, so a future commission may decide to do a major project and use a property tax supported bond to do that project. So it may not get this small, but assuming, I mean, if you kind of look at this to service pavement management program debt, the mill levy goes down pretty dramatically, pretty fast. This assumes the same 3% annual increase in assessed values. Again, we used $400,000 to pay down that mill levy in the first year. The big brown bar here on the left, the reason that is so large is because in the previous slide I said we were going to use the countywide sales tax money to pay off that temp note. That's paying off that temp note. That's why debt service looks so big in that first year, because we're paying that off instead of funding that with a bond. So, in conclusion, the city's long-term fiscal health is a driving factor behind my excitement about this program and our decision to recommend to you today that we break the cycle using our reserves. The prudent management of expenses over the previous decade, long before I was here, the post-pandemic recovery of our local sales tax revenue, the growth in countywide sales tax, and the growth in both local and countywide use tax have put the city in a position to make this investment in the future. Less debt will lower the city's reliance on the property tax mill levy to service debt. It will increase our fiscal flexibility for future citizens and future commissions. It will make the city less susceptible to future recessions. It will save the city money on debt issuance costs and interest expense, and increase our future borrowing capacity. That concludes my presentation.
Great job. Can we give a round of applause?
Thank you.
Excellent work, and I'm sure that we all would love to see less debt. And, but thank you for your presentation. Great job.
I like the idea of pay-as-you-go.
Yes.
Debt service to me is a waste of money. I hate borrowing.
Bingo.
I mean, I hate borrowing, hated paying a mortgage, I don't pay when you want
Absolutely,
it.
especially at the rates that
But
we're showing.
interest and debt service is a waste of money, and I do like the idea of pay-as-you-go and not being as reliant on the countywide sales tax and the other.
Have we ever had that opportunity in the past, or do you know that we ever did pay-as-you-go? Or we just weren't at that point to where we are now and saying, we can do that?
Yeah, so we've been, before I got here, is
Yeah.
when you started, then we talked about the cycle, and then we talked about the cost, the cash cost of breaking this, and so we haven't been in the position, we've talked about it, I talked about it probably with two previous finance directors, and just, this is the first time that we were able to put it together where it looked like it was actually feasible based on the financial situation of the city.
And you have reserves, which is something that,
Right, and I
few
guess
years
another
ago, we
question is, we can have a
increased
further
that.
discussion on reserves, but this won't affect the city's ability to have sufficient reserves for bond rating or any other rainy day fund. We're still well within our bond reserve levels by going this direction.
what it looks like.
And so this is the first time that we felt that this was something we could bring to the commission.
So in theory, the way you laid it out, and I love all the details, Roberta, this is great, I love all those numbers. What could that mean down the road for the average taxpayer here in the city?
Well, in theory, if all future commissions after this commission didn't borrow any more money, they would, that 6.9 mill levy could go down to nothing, because that mill levy is specific for debt. This is not our budgeting conversation, so we should defer that for that conversation. But it improves the flexibility of future commissions, right, and future citizens. If we may decide to borrow money for something else, that mill levy could go down, and then we could increase the mill levy. Let's say we reduce the mill levy for debt by 6, but we would increase the mill levy for the Parks Department by 3, so we're actually funding the Parks Department with enough mill levy. It just gives us flexibility.
So in theory, we could lower property taxes based off of the 10-year
Eventually,
plus plan that you laid
yeah.
out.
I mean, obviously, the first few years are more expensive, but yes, we would be less reliant on a mill levy to service debt if we stopped borrowing money for the pavement management program.
Great information.
I like not owing.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Not having to pay,
I'm debt averse.
especially
I'm debt averse. Saying that, I am debt averse, but saying that for a city, there are often really good reasons to borrow money. Like I said early in the presentation, if you have a big project like the firehouse, you know that firehouse is gonna be here for 30 years. If you took out a 10 or 15-year bond to fund the construction of that, and future citizens are paying for the firehouse that they're gonna be using, there is some sense in that. I did have some fairly long conversations with both Greg and Phil. Phil's our bond counsel and Greg our investment broker. And of course, they're the ones that make the money when we borrow the money, so they're like, well, borrowing money's good. And I said, well, yes, I understand that, but I'm talking about our maintenance program, and they're like, oh, borrowing money for maintenance, that's bad. And but they definitely agree that the major purchases, major projects, funded by debt makes sense.
Sure.
And I guess, I think that borrowing money should never be routine, right? We got to think about it. Why are we borrowing money this year? Because we're obligating our citizens, our future citizens, when we borrow money. And sometimes it's the exact right decision for the city. But for something we do every year, it seems kind of cray-cray.
And it sounds like we're all on the same page. Do we need a consensus, or do you have enough information for us to implement this, or is this something that
Yeah, I'll entertain some questions. I'd like to
Okay.
get feedback over the next week or two or three again. We've done, well, Roberta's done, the heavy lifting on how to make this work, and we presented. If you'd like to see other ways, you know, if you'd like to see other options, let us know. We don't need an official consensus,
Okay.
you know. If there's any major
Yeah.
objections or questions, come see us, I guess,
Well, if there are other options, you always want to present those too.
right?
So
And-
if
yeah.
there are other options, I'd like to see them.
So there's no really other options to achieve what we've achieved here.
Yeah.
If there's any details you'd like, another breakdown of the countywide sales tax and use, where are those, reserves, does that forego any projects? We could drill down into that, but as far as the funding sources to get there, we're solid on those, and there really aren't any other options. Those are the reserves that would be required.
You've told me this before, Ms. Kramer, what's our current reserve level at right now?
Well, so like Paul mentioned, this proposal doesn't touch the reserves in the general fund. This only uses the reserves in the countywide sales tax and the citywide sales tax fund. And I don't have that exact number off the top of my head, but I do know, and it's gonna change as we are closing the books for 2022 as we speak. And that's going to inform our beginning balance of those funds that we have to use for this. But I know they're sufficient to get us started on this program. And I guess that was my other point, it kind of came up when Paul was speaking, is the reason we really don't need a consensus, so to speak. Just knowing you approve of the idea, it informs the budget process, right? So this informs, are we going to be borrowing money, or am I figuring out how to fund this? Do I need cash to fund this program? So the decision is going to get made. You will make the decision, but you'll make the decision through the budget process.
So what could we, and I sorry to be maybe dumb on this or something, but what would you anticipate seeing? You talk about borrowing as opposed to, hey, maybe we need more cash to fund different things. How could we expect to see that laid out for us? What's going to be the big change we're going to see is different? Because I would imagine, I got cautions on that in my head on what that could look like. I'm all about going to this type of program. I think it's good, and I would try to figure out, hey, can we shorten even that time frame? Is there anything we could look at possibly to get there? But what could we expect to see maybe major or significant impact this year versus maybe the last?
I'll answer that,
What would
Roberta.
we see?
So I think the best way to answer that is because it's CIP sales tax money and not general fund money, what the opportunity cost of using this money for this is that's roughly $3 million that you're taking off the table for a road project or parks project or something else. It is money that essentially, for all intents and purposes, is available to the commission to do something else with. But if you choose to use it to buy down this, then that's just not there. However, the funding for the CIP, the normal level funding is still there. This would be CIP reserves. So you'd still have a full complement of normal CIP revenue to expend during the CIP process. This money would just be taken off. You could do projects in '23 that you were waiting to '24. You could, do a road project. It's just, you're taking that $3 million in cash off the table.
That would make it available to look at tax cuts too.
It's a one-time revenue source. So that's the other part too, is it's a reserve that's been created a lot by just conservative spending, and we have a better idea on forecasting now. The countywide sales tax and use tax is internet sales, have really exploded. And so we just budgeted low, so we sort of have this, I don't want to say it's a one-time amount of money, but it sort of is. So if you take that into tax reduction, then how are you paying for it in year
Yeah,
two?
yeah.
But if you use it for this to break this cycle that only requires a one-time cost, then you're sort of servicing what the principle is behind one-time revenues.
Sounds like we're preparing for the future.
It is, it is, and it really does protect the city during a recession.
Yeah.
Right, because during a recession, our revenues will go down, but if we lowered that nut, then we don't have to worry about paying the debt off first, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of recession-proofs us a little bit, yeah.
I love the idea, yeah.
And what is our actual just city general reserve set to right now? I mean, where are we standing on it? Just out of curiosity.
We're probably somewhere around $8 million.
Okay.
Yeah,
How much is that?
about $8 million in the city general reserves.
Just asking the question, are we able to use any of that to jumpstart some of this too, to maybe pay up a little bit more?
Yeah, so we talked about one kind of ways. We used some money last year to buy a little bit. You saw the graph where it was 6.9 million and it goes up to 8.3 because we used some reserve money. We could use some reserve money to buy down that increase so it doesn't go back up. I also have to think about 4th Street. I think that's the big thing that we talked about is we have sufficient reserves, and I don't think it would detrimentally affect the city to use reserves rather than borrowing money for the balance of 4th Street. So again, we're not creating any new debt. You know, that's $1.2 million to $1.5 million, depending on where that comes in. But yeah, you could buy down a little bit of the 2024 mill levy. That's like we did last year, to stabilize that a little bit we can discuss that during the budget process.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 27% is.
Yeah, and my initial budget calculations in the CIP, actually, I assumed that we were gonna keep the mill at 6.9 for debt, that we wouldn't let it go back up, and then we were gonna use some of our reserves for that. I didn't build it in because that's a budget decision, and I'm like, well, I can't build in budget decisions that I'm not allowed to make. So I would say that makes sense to keep that mill at 6.9 and buy that down. And then, and Paul's right, I do believe we have the reserves to fund the 1.4 million or 1.5 million for the 4th Street project. And then it starts to feel a little tight, but I don't think it's the wrong thing to do. This presentation built borrowing that money in. So if we don't borrow that money, then the mill will get reduced faster, right?
Definitely on board with
Yeah.
that as a.
So, I mean, I think we can leave that as a budgeting discussion, and look at it both ways, but, yeah, I think both options should stay on the table for that for now, but that's, I mean, my initial presentation showed us not borrowing the money, and then I put it back in.
John Richmeyer, catch it, we're lowering property taxes.
No.
Don't say that.
We may, but that's a discussion
That's
to
another
make.
discussion.
Yeah, this is not a property, this is not a
No,
mill
I'm
levy
joking, I'm
discussion.
joking.
This is a debt discussion.
Well, and I really like Roberta, I mean, I love the data, I like that, kind of like what Paul has said, you know, put the horsepower into developing more of a comprehensive program to, you know, what could the outcome be down the road. So I love that. I want to ask my commission team, would you say, like, would we have like a desire, or, you know, our thoughts are to try to see what we could do, knowing that we're early on in the budgeting cycle right now, to see what we could do this year to try to, you know, keep the mill levy, you know, flat, if anything, if we can reduce it any ways. Like, this is helpful, this is very impactful, and it, you know, for me, it helps my mind, like, okay, how can we start thinking about everything strategically, you know? So is there a desire maybe to get to that?
I think that's what the goal was.
This
I think
is the
that's
goal.
what
I mean,
she's
for,
asking.
this is a
Yeah.
piece of it, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is
the
one
goal.
piece of
I
it.
think that,
Well,
I
it
think
is
we'll move
long-term,
forward
right, and like you said, we're not gonna see the impact right away.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking the question,
If we can keep it
as
level down.
a team.
Yeah, it's not gonna raise, it'll
We would want to
level
do
or
that.
lower, right?
Right, and that's, like I said, that's part of the budget discussion that we'll have. And I'm imagining some robust conversations, and Andrew is here tonight. He's our new deputy finance director. He's gonna be helping us with the budget, so.
As well, I know specific questions.
No, we're good.
Okay.
But he'll be helping us with the budget, so
Great.
good opportunity to say hi to Andrew. We're so excited.
Good to
have
meet
him
you,
here.
Andrew.
So, what would be the opportunity, maybe, Paul, to come together again sometime, maybe just, you know, study session or whatever, shorter term than, longer term, to just kind of start getting more ideas and thoughts out there. Don't want to micromanage anything,
Yeah.
but just kind of keep it fresh and front and center, so it's not July and then we're having the
Sure.
conversation.
So the next key development is getting the information from the county appraisal's office. Until we have that, we're really operating in the dark. There's not really a sense in having a discussion until we know where appraisals are. We expect that in the next 2 weeks. So we'll get those numbers, we'll see what that looks like, and then we'll start communicating on, because that really, I mean, you
drives
could
it.
have a little discussion or a huge discussion depending on where that goes.
Sure.
And we'll finish our forecasting on revenues and some expenses, and then we want to be able to have that information for you.
Okay.
But yeah, that information will be in the paper, but we need to get that. We don't get it ahead of time usually, so once we have
Maybe
that.
end of March, possibly,
Yeah, I was thinking third week,
as far as to be able to start discussing it again.
Yeah, it's
third
possible.
Tuesday in
Give us
March,
updates, we give
that
us
study
updates
session.
too.
Oh, I can't commit to that yet, but yeah, I mean, something around there probably looks pretty
Something to
good.
pencil in the
Yeah,
schedule.
no, we can
Not pen.
look at that,
You're making me sweat.
yeah.
I'm gonna be working on the audit.
So, yeah, sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
There are two major
Yeah.
projects that happen this time of year.
Well, Maybe
keep that in
maybe you
mind.
slide it back, to the
Tax
following
on.
study
Yeah,
session.
so, for
Yeah,
sure.
well, definitely appreciate your time and your presentation.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments amongst the commissioners?
Yeah, just,
Feel free to reach out over
Yeah.
the next couple
Great
weeks
job.
as you go through this. If you need
Yeah.
clarification, reach out.
I know this was a lot of work, and not just you and your whole team. So please express, I think I speak for the whole commission, our gratitude for all the work that's been done.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this particular topic. It is a pet of mine, and it felt really good to.
You made it
Paul and I
not
have been
too
talking
painful.
about it for since I was.
She made it not
promoted.
too painful. Not too
So-
painful.
Yeah, really.
So thank you for taking the time.
And I like your
Thank you.
teaching style along the way too, so keep that up.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
I do my best. I can tell when I'm losing people. I'm like, I don't know.
Paul, what'd you mention at the end?
What's that?
You said reach out if we have any questions.
Yes, please do. If you're going through this, if you have any questions, hypotheticals,
Yeah.
you want some different numbers, just let us know. We want to have that discussion with y'all.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Next item on the agenda, solid waste operation discussion, trash bags.
Right, Mr. Mayor and Commission, so this is the fourth topic. We started September 6th. We went through collection approach, bulk item pickup, enforcement approach. We've done all the heavy lifting. Trash bags is sort of a loose end, and we needed to bring it up sooner rather than later. So just briefly, the City Leavenworth Code of Ordinances does state that the city shall provide each refuse customer 2 packages of plastic disposable refuse can liners per year, which may be used to contain and store refuse. So based on commission feedback throughout the process listed above, there seemed to be a consensus to end the practice once we implemented the polycart system. And so there had been some question as to whether we do a spring one, when would it end? And I think that question was sort of resolved for us. We were informed by the Leavenworth Lions Club. Understandably, with the uncertainty behind it, they just said, hey, we're out. We're no longer, and for anybody who's noticing, they've provided an amazing service to the city for a number of years, delivering every single bag, 12,000 addresses that we have, and so, but they did let us know that they were gonna end that program. They were no longer interested in delivering the bags. So with the labor required to deliver the bags removed from the equation, the timing seemed appropriate to go ahead and start the formal action to revise and remove from the Code of Ordinances provisions related to the service. We do have to repeal or edit the ordinance since that is a requirement that we have. So a few questions. First, I'll ask at the end for a consensus to go ahead and start having staff prepare a shift to the ordinance. We'll have to do 2 readings and change that in the ordinance. But then a couple questions that I'm sure would come up is, we do have about 10,000 bags still on hand. And so we would plan to, and I think we've all talked about this, continue to sell them the
Yes.
normal, the way that we do, clerk's office or something. Probably last a couple years. There'll probably be a rush on them once we announce that we're not gonna do it in the spring. And then, of course, there's budget questions we'll get into when we talk about the refuse budget. These are all paid for by user fees. This is not tax revenue, sales tax revenue, property tax revenue. Everything, the bags, service, the individuals, the landfill fees are all paid from that $19.20, 27 cents a month, something that you pay. So the budget questions arise that with the funding now required to purchase the bag, will that reduce fees? It could. A couple variables in there. Landfill fees went up this year. We don't know that until October. About $48,000 in an increase in landfill fees. That's a small market. There's Waste Management, there's Ham's Quarry, that's about it. So we are a bit at a disadvantage on that. They've been competitive. Half of that was a special waste fee, which is what we take from the sewage plant. But those increased tipping fees or fees come from user fees. And then, again, I just want to emphasize the enterprise status of this. So if we have increases in salaries and benefits for all of our refuse workers, those are user fees. Maintenance, commodities, repairs, or equipment, those are all funded by user fees. So hopefully that reduction in cost would mean that you have more revenue. If your tipping fees go up 9% a year, you're essentially losing that savings that you made. But we will evaluate that for the budget process for next year's budget when we look at what rates could be, removing that item from the expense column. So
Yeah, I think.
I just wanted to put that out there.
We should try to do that because people are not gonna be getting the bags, they're gonna be buying them themselves.
Absolutely.
So I think they should come off
Yeah,
there.
so it's not a line item. It's not like you pay $17 for your fee and then you pay
Right.
$2 a month. It's all in one. And so
But it includes those bags.
it could be that if your rate is flat, you actually have a reduction in rate because you're not paying for the increase in landfill fees of $48,000 or,
Yeah.
employee benefits and salary and commodities. So that'll be fleshed out in the budget process. We certainly would hope that would come to fruition, but we'll have to see on that.
Yeah, I mean, rough numbers that I was running on, just the refuse, waste fee that we're paying monthly. If we were able to reduce it, I think last year we paid close to $298,000 for bags. I think cutting that out, it looked like we're gonna maybe be able to save 1% on that line item.
The quote for the bags was $244,000, and we only bought half of them, remember?
Yeah,
But that was so much higher than it had been the previous year, it was like double.
That's right.
So, what's kind of baked into the refuse budget is about $125,000.
Okay. So maybe a 3 or 4% decrease, but still, yeah, if we could. So, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So basically, just looking for a consensus, I know we've just started to get questions, are you going to? And so we'll move forward with that, so.
Yeah, I'm good.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we did have a third item tonight, but we weren't able to bring it, so that's the end of our prepared meeting. We should have that soon.
Amen.
$10,000.
When do you expect this to start? I know people are gonna ask or they're asking.
So the bids are out now on the street for the poly carts. So they'll come in and we'll look at that. The commitment from staff is to bring you back the written and final policies on the bulky item pickup, and for you to approve. And so I think we're either looking at a June 1 or July 1. I'll have to get with the Public
Okay.
Works Director about a rollout for the program. So
Around the corner.
right around the corner is
So there won't be
right.
any delivery in March.
Right, there will be no more trash bag deliveries.
And so people, if they need bags, they need to go to the city and get them, right?
Yeah, we'll continue to sell them.
If they're,
Yeah.
I saw somebody
clerk's
walking out of
office
city,
in the-
yeah.
Yeah, they're for sale right now.
There's a guy walking out of City Hall this afternoon when I came in.
Yeah, it's
He had
very, very popular.
Two sets of bags,
Yeah.
two bags of bags.
We purchase
two
ours.
bags of bags.
My husband wasn't.
Yeah,
So it's like, you need to go down and buy a
Sure.
bunch, okay?
Are you gonna buy back the bags that people have?
no, there's no buyback, no buyback provision.
Oh.
You can sell them on eBay.
I've got about six rolls, yeah.
If you don't want them, I'll take them.
All right, well, that
No, I
concludes our
know what
meeting.
my wife's gonna do with them.
I'm going to go around the table to see if anyone have anything they would like to say, starting with Paul.
No, I know we had a couple commissioners there tonight. We had the open house for the new Centennial Bridge. We had a really good turnout. I got there right at 4, and there was a good group. And then as some of the elected officials came through, there was still a pretty good group. And so I think HDR did a wonderful job on that. We've gotten pretty good feedback. So it was really nice to see. A quick transit update. I was speaker at the Leavenworth County Human Services Group today, along with Julie Hurley, and we talked about that. The vans are here. Right now, what's going on is there's the implementation of the app. The software company that KCATA uses is training the Guidance Center staff on the app and the technology. And we're looking at first or second week of April as the launch, so.
Great.
A lot of the businesses are as excited about this as some of the nonprofits as they try to work to get workers to the job site every day. So we're excited about that. That's all I have.
It'll be everywhere in this city of Leavenworth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't have anything. Have a great rest of the week.
Enjoy the rest of the week. Absolutely. Be careful, it's gonna get cold, Thursday, I believe
Thursday
it
morning,
is.
yeah.
It's gonna really be cold, so please be careful, don't slip and slide out there or anything like that.
Nothing on this side, so everybody have a good week.
Springtime is here, we're getting ready for Lent. We've got the St. Patrick's Day coming up on March 17th. So get your
Green.
application in for your float or whatever you want to have. We'd love to have you.
Yep, I just want to give a shout out to the Armed Forces Bank, the team that actually put together a Black History program honoring our Buffalo soldiers. Thank you for everyone that participated and attended as well. It was great. I learned a lot of history and just want to say, be safe. God bless you all. And I hope that you all stay warm. God bless you. I'm going to the beach.
Yes.